It came out well. I just didn't get a chance to put it up. You know how nervous I was. You know what? I went home that night. I said, I'll worry about it in the morning. I got an hour, got everything, and it's running now. So I just have to chop it and put it up. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming. I want to say thank you for no snow. That's been kind of my epitaph. We had a couple events we've had. This is the second of our IT Leadership Panel Series for this session. And for this session, our series is called Industry Game Changers, Integrating the Customer's Voice. We're going to be discussing the best ways to include the customer in the actual process. As many of you know, my name is Peggy McCoy, and I'm the Director of the Graduate Programs here at LaSalle, both in Computer Information Science and Information Technology. On behalf of our faculty, our students, and our board members, I want to say how pleased we are that you're able to join us. I'd like to extend a special welcome to not only our board members, but also to our alums and to some of our other guests who are joining us for the first time. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our programs here at LaSalle. The Department of Mathematics and Computer Science is actually the home for 6 different technology programs, 2 mathematics degrees, and 1 in mathematics education. The technology degrees include 4 undergraduate and 2 graduate programs. The graduate degrees include a BA and a BS in Computer Science and Mathematics, and a BS in Information Technology, along with a BA in Digital Arts and Multimedia Design, and a BA and BS in Math Education. The graduate degrees are an MS in both Computer Information Science and Information Technology Leadership. And I notice we do have some of our grads here with us tonight, which I'm very proud to say what kind of wonderful projects and examples they give to some of our other students. Our programs use both formal theory and application to show that they can exhibit the needs of the changing markets. Our students are always the best evidence of our practice. I'd like to now begin to talk a little bit about our subject, and before I begin, I'd like to introduce each of our panel members and ask them to tell you a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to start on this end. We have Jerry Ann Bertucci. So Jerry Ann.
So she mentioned I'm Jerry Ann Bertucci.
Is that one? I think they're...
No problem. So as she mentioned, my name is Jerry Ann Bertucci. I'm a usability strategist for a firm called Intuitive Company. We're a user-centered design firm in the Philadelphia area. My background is in anthropology. I have a bachelor and a master's from the University of Pennsylvania. I've been in the industry for many years now. I've done everything from application design and user research associated with that to product design. And at this point, I'm still mostly on the application side.
And I'd like to introduce Scott Lynn.
Hello, my name is Scott Lynn. I'm Director of User Experience at Siemens Healthcare. I primarily work on a product that's browser-based and used in hospitals throughout the United States and Europe. Before that, I worked as a Director of Usability Engineering at it's called Telcordia Technologies, and I was part of a spin-off from Bell Labs.
And I'd like to introduce Sherry Henson.
Hi, I'm Sherry Henson, and let's see, I like to tell people I have a checkered past when it comes to this field. But to start with, I'm a user experience architect at Primavera, which is now part of Oracle. And what I do there is, my job is primarily to work on our overall experience strategy, design, and usability, also to build out our design team, and also work toward best practices in our design practices, and build out a customer outreach program as well. My background is nothing initially to do with design at all, except that I have a PhD in English Renaissance Literature from Penn State. See, very, very relevant. But I also have a long background in art. And so, interestingly enough, we were talking about that the way I got introduced to this was how I was teaching technical writing at Penn State many years ago. And what we were starting to do is actually teach principles of document design and usability within technical writing. So when I left academia and came into corporate experience, it was a real natural transition to me to go from a writing background to technical writing and then start to come into design and bring all of those elements of experience with me there. So I think that's probably a good summation.
Okay, the format that we're going to use is pretty straightforward. I think many of you have already visited us for some of our panel discussions. We have a set of questions that we have given to our panelists. We're going to start going through them, but we offer you the chance to interject or ask any additional questions that you may have as we go along. Pretty informal, and let's see where we go. So let's get started. Customer opinions are critical to achieving best results. Can you suggest strategies for engaging the best customer into the design of the product? And I'm going to ask Jarianne, would you want to take that one?
Sure. Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
How would you define the best customer?
Well, that's one of the questions that we look at. In our last discussion, we actually had a question as to who was the customer. And I think taking from that, we've decided that the marketing department is not the customer. However, the marketing department helps influence the type of customers that we are looking to engage. So I would say that if we define customer, we're looking at the person that is probably going to be working with the product or working with the final process that is being implemented. So I'm going to leave it that way.
Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to make sure. So, I've run into a lot, I'll just start it this way. I mean, as an anthropologist, obviously I want to talk to the people on the ground who are doing things and how that works. It's just my background and my style. But I'm working in industry and being a consultant for many years, you run into a lot of, first you run into a lot of scope issues, right? So how many can you talk to? You have budget, you have time, you have all these things you need to handle. Obviously, I would love to talk to someone or a whole group of people for a year, because I give you much better information or much more detail. I could probably tell you every little thing you would ever want to know. But as it relates to technologies, systems, how to design those, it's just really important to engage them as much as you can in the process and wherever and however you can do it. If you don't have a large budget, you engage them very quick and very iteratively, right? You throw paper in front of them and let them see it. Just keep getting feedback on what you're doing to potential users, right? To the, maybe the more structured, we're discussing the cost potentially of usability testing and eye tracking, right? That gets really out there in terms of cost sometimes. So, I would rather you engage them quickly, easily, than at the start of the process. One of the most important things before you even start really designing, because this is part of the design process, is to understand who it is you're designing for, how they use whatever your product is. I'm going to say product because I think, an application, a system, or a handheld device, they're all a product, they're all something they're using. You really need to understand that realm, that space, what happens, and not just specifically that system, but what goes on around it. So if you use an intranet, right, you want to know why they're using the intranet and what kind of work they have to do in and around that intranet, right, because that's the area of missed opportunity. So however you can get it in there, and as early as possible, and continually throughout the process. Did that answer?
Yeah. Any other additional comments?
Yeah, that sounds good. I would just add, at Siemens, what we do is we have an agile development process, so that works in monthly cycles. And what we do is we have, because it's a specialized product, we'll get specialized user groups, so physicians or nurses, to do reviews, each month at least, sometimes a couple times a month as we iterate through, we get their feedback. Above and beyond that, because what people do doesn't always match what they say, we go out and we do contextual inquiry and testing out in the field. but primarily it's hard to get too far off track if you're showing things to customers each month. And I guess in terms of, was it finding the right best customers?
The best customer.
So, I mean, it's important to get all different kinds of customers, right? Hear what they have to say. And then, you know, you sort of learn and judge which customers' opinions you value more than others, which ones you think about it more deeply, and offering, you know, insight that you can turn into concrete actions. So.
I was laughing at the question myself because I saw this two same pieces to that, which is what makes the best customer and then how do you get to that best customer. And to me, like, so kind of starting with the best customer, it's obviously like all the things that we talked about, but in tying into what Scott was saying, is actually starting to have initial conversations with people who you've identified that are the kind of customer representation that you want to talk to. So I can get on the phone and have, and we've been doing this, I've been working with our strategy group and having different calls with different people across different industries. And some people are really gung-ho to talk about what they do. They understand what you're asking, and other people are like, I really don't know what my people do. I really don't know what you're asking me for. And that's when you say, okay, you're not probably the best person, but the person who wants to stay and talk for an hour and a half or 2 hours when we schedule 1 hour is the kind of person. So you kind of get, it's just feeling them out and starting to get that sense of how they relate to you and how engaged they are and how willing they are not to go on a rant about how much they don't like your product. So for example, Siemens Med is a big customer of Primavera. And one of the things that we are trying to do is, and I'll just make this pitch to you now and everybody else can laugh, is to actually try to get in and start working with Siemens because of some of the research that we want to do on how IT shops, and especially agile shops, manage their projects. Because Primavera software is used across all kinds of industries. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm engaged in doing is, you know, hitting people up, like, you know, talking to Scott and putting him on the spot in front of everybody, and then using my other contacts that I know to try to get us in. And especially when you're dealing with really large corporations like us, we have NDAs we have to sign, and so there's a lot of stuff that has to happen around. But the nice thing is, once you've got the big mechanics out of the way, right, and you start talking with people, now it's real easy for me. I've got a list of people now that I can start to call. And I can call Avi in Baltimore and say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. Do you have some time? And I think the other part of that is, and I'm probably babbling on to some of the next questions, but one of the things that I think is really important in engaging the strategy of engagement is making sure that there's a reciprocal kind of relationship. Obviously, I want to talk to you because there's a lot I can learn. But until that potential participant in this research understands that I'm going to share things back with you, let me show you what we've learned, let me show you some of the things we're designing, then it becomes a kind of mutual exchange. And those people who engage with us in that way now have a vested interest in continuing to communicate and participate with us.
I would love to have you in. There's one field that keeps if you fix that, it would be eternally great.
And you know what's really creepy about all this? Because we were laughing about what a small world it is. I used to work at Siemens, and in one of my 2 stints at Siemens, I was there when they started introducing Primavera. And when I was there, we hated working on Primavera. So imagine how funny it is for me to go back and work on the software I used to need to work on. So.
Just, if I could ask you a question about, so you guys all work for like large application development, or you're facilitating or consulting to large application development shops, let's say. Do you have anything that you'd share for someone who's more on like the internal IT deployment, building, you know, whether it be an ERP system or an internal system? You know, your users, you guys have a time to groom your users and get to know who's good. Any recommendations for someone who's just like, I go out and I do prototyping all the time, but it seems like the feedback is just, you know, generally out of sync. You know, they don't know what they don't know what they don't know. Any way to like accelerate that curve?
I would ask, so I was going to say that it seems like the most important thing you do is just watch somebody try to use your product. Try to watch somebody try to use your product, or watch somebody try to use a competitor's product. And that's what, probably one of the most valuable things we can do. But it sounds like you said you're doing that already.
Well, no, actually, it's more like hand it off to them and say, give me your feedback.
No, I would sit there and watch people use it. Actually, Jared Spool, who's big in our industries, tried to look at what are the most likely factors to help a company have a great user experience, real usable product. He looked at, what are their internal processes for usability testing. He looked at what's the size of the UX department. He looked at a lot of different variables. And the one that he has been talking about kind of last year is most predictive of whether a company will have a usable product or not. And good user experience is how often, if most people at the company spend, I think it's a couple hours every 6 weeks watching someone try to use their product. And that gives a much deeper understanding of the things you could be doing and pain points for your users.
And the nice thing too, you can start to leverage our web conferencing tools. So when you can't get to someone, arrange time and do a web conference. I was at SunGard Higher Education. We're going to hear a lot of places know that, but at SunGard we were doing actually this may sound kind of funny, but we were doing group validation. We couldn't get out to a lot of schools at once, but what we could do is get a lot of people together, either in a room together and do sort of like a group guided usability where I would have a scenario, everybody would have it, but I wouldn't tell them what to do. I would say, I'm the driver who broadcast it up. I'm like, you all tell me what to do. So it's an interesting thing. You get some people who merge as, I'm going to talk, and then you get some people fired up, and they're like, but no, it should be like this. And you get actually really great conversation. But we did that in person with students. We also did video versions of it. And even recently talking with customers, just doing some basic research kind of stuff. We had a WebEx going, and I'm like, I'm going to give you control. You show us what you're using in the system, and just show us what you're talking about. Because the minute that you can actually say, show me, then you can actually, the key is getting them to talk about problems. Everybody will come and tell you, I needed to do this. They're always talking in terms of solutions. Because in their head, they've already moved from problem to, if it only did it this way, then they always think in terms of solution. So if you can get them to actually, like what we're all saying, show you how to do things. And you can do guided things, you can do unguided things, and have them start to talk about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to accomplish it. I think that would help them too.
That's extremely important because one of the most common things we run into is I want it to be like this. I want it to do this, right? So the people are already designing the application and that, or whatever it is, and that doesn't mean it's wrong or it's incorrect, right? But they're one piece of the puzzle, and you're talking to people who represent all different groups, and you have to create one thing that works, right? So one of the big things about that is taking that into account and understanding where that comes from. So why do they want it to do that? What is it about that that's important? How do they, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to complete a task? Are they, how is that working? And if you can understand what that is, what their goal is as a user, then you can really get an understanding at a larger scale of what's really going on and what the needs are as it relates to making changes.
Is getting the group feedback better than individual feedback, or is it just different?
It's different. When you're faced with issues of expediency in terms of time, and especially in terms of money, and especially when you're in an organization that isn't used to doing this kind of thing, right? Events like that can help. They can be a quick win to help demonstrate, here's all the feedback that we got. So often what happens in the design process, from our perspective, we'll say, from what we know about the customers, what we've done our research, and here's how we're designing to best practice. And then you've got your product owners and your VPs who say, but it really should do it this way, or it should look like this. And so you got kind of the politics on the one side, and then you got the design side. And it really doesn't mean a lot that I'm using fists to show this. But when you're trying to persuade the politics to move over to really what's the better design for the user, right? that kind of response can, when you can get it that immediate, and especially in a group setting like that, like what we did at Soundgarden, where you have those stakeholders sitting in and listening in, then they see it and hear it for themselves. And they get a whole coaching on ground rules and not talking and stuff like that. But it's a matter of expediency, really, and we've done it at some user conferences as well. And like I said, from a customer side, they love it. They even love getting together as a group, and then they start talking about process. And that was one of the great things. I just sat there, and like we did a few things, and they just started talking with some, I think we're talking about some higher ed registration processes. And you could hear the different elements that influenced how registration was handled at different kinds of institutions. You could hear a core across all institutions, whether they're community college or private or whatever. You could hear a common thread about what scheduling or registering for classes meant. But the neat thing is you've got all these people who might not normally talk together are talking and sharing many of the same concerns. And then at the same time, you hear, like from a community college, you might have much more specific business requirements or restrictions, or I've got government restrictions I have to handle or account for, versus something in a private institution that you might not. So it kind of also helps give you a bigger picture of the politics and culture at play within the different kinds of organizations.
How do you manage the politics of, we've never done this before, so we don't need it?
Actually, I just want to follow up on one thing on that. I mean, you're always going to use your judgment in this, right? So, like, I'm sure you talk about, a lot of the positives of that. And to do this in any way, because probably you're going to gain some insights that you wouldn't have gotten any otherwise. In a group setting, you could also have one or two people that dominate the conversation. So you'll be able to tell if that's happening, and you'll sort of try to, facilitate to get more feedback from the other people who are being quiet, or you will, you make judgments on it, right? Just like we're not probably ever talking about doing things that are large, statistically significant tests. So you're always going to be using your judgment. So, and when you see something, you see somebody struggling with it, like it's really a quick human reaction. It's going to, ring true. You'll say, oh, I never looked at it that way. I see exactly why they're struggling. Like, it's look at the product with fresh eyes. And I guess, do you want to this one?
Yeah, I just want to add to that too, just because I have a pretty strong, it really, the level of information you get will be slightly very different. So when you put people in a group, there's a totally different group dynamic, right? And so people change when they're in the group, and you have to start balancing things like potentially power struggles or things of that nature. Like if they're all representative of an organization and they're not at the same level in the organization, you're gonna have kind of dealing with power, status, things of that nature. So you have a lot of those things to take into account when you're dealing with group, but as it relates to time and doing something quickly, right, it's definitely great, to get feedback and it's just the level, right? It's different sometimes, though, than sitting next to someone while they're at the computer doing whatever it is, and you get to watch them do that, because they're not going to be able to do that with you in a large group, right? So it's just the balance of that. What are you trying to do? And I find in terms of time and cost, sometimes I'll push for one or two in person and make sure that they're on their own, and I can really kind of connect with them and learn more about how they do their jobs and what happens, and then the rest might be groups, right? So it's actually really great to balance the different methods too, and if you can, and do many different things, right? Because then you get all these different pictures, because the group dynamic is just as valuable as the kind of personal and the screen dynamic, right? If you get that complete picture, it's really helpful.
Just actually one other thing.
That's question.
If you're doing this and you're not used to doing this, you really want to make it clear to the user that you're testing the software, not them, right? So I've been in ones where people have been new at this, and the people get uptight and they think you're testing them, and guys like this have a napkin and they're sweating a napkin and stick to his hand. I haven't.
Well, I have.
Someone else.
And so is Gene.
Yeah.
Someone
So you just want to make it really clear to them that you're really looking at software and it's not a test of them. So.
And I guess to also add to that, terms of the group and the group dynamics, one of the interesting things in putting our design for registration system in front of groups was the different response you get putting it in front of students versus in front of university decision makers, right? So when you've got faculty and deans sitting there and saying, but this is how we want registration to go, because you know how that is, right? We've got a process, this is what we want to achieve. we have our goals in this process, and the student has a different goal, right? So you actually do get very interesting, and you never mix that level, but you do get a very interesting interplay there. And I would say that's one of the challenges in engaging customers is really, and your definition of customer, Peggy, was what I was thinking about, was the difference between the decision maker as the customer that you're putting your designs in front of for validation versus the user who works for the decision maker. So the decision maker has their vested interest. We want to make sure certain things happen, but the user's the one that's got to live with it every day. And you want to make sure that they adopt the system so the decision maker says this was a really good investment. So it's the balance of the two.
To balance.
I was curious, as you say you have a product and you take it through a life cycle development over time, version control, so to speak. How much of the real-time information do you use? That is, people call into support centers, people text, they do whatever form of communication. You have a wealth of information as to what is workable and not within the product design as it is. How much does that feed into?
We always ask for it. If people track it and they have it, we ask for it. I ask for it in every project I'm on.
Well, that's a great question. Who tracks it?
Well, I mean, for some of our customers, it's a customer call center and they have a tracking system or something of that nature. So they'll usually have either a database or at least talk to a person in there or people who take the calls and ask, just from their gut feel, what are the main things they hear. So that's extremely important because we're not going to capture all of those instances of kind of trouble or issue when you do,
Well, I'm thinking again for a corporation who has a vested interest in next generation versions of the product. Do you create models to collect and assimilate and report on that which is problematic so that it feeds into a process?
So I'll kind of chime in on this one to answer your question about the politics. How do you deal with the politics? So I agree that support groups, and I know our Supreme America is very knowledgeable about our products and our customers. There is an unfortunate chasm, and I've seen it not just at Primavera, but in other organizations I've worked at before, a big chasm between support and development, right? How do you start to engage support in what they know without letting support design? It's, it's that ownership. There is a lot of ownership involved here when you're talking about design. That's a whole other tangent. But everybody has a vested interest. And I think I have yet to see a way in which, you can start to reach out. There's people you want to talk to and support. And within an organization, and it's easier for you because you come in from the outside. Yes. But to try to create that relationship and build it in a way that satisfies the parties, right? And kind of negotiates that seed between the two. Because they do have valuable information. They do come back. We do have, not to say that it goes into the support and disappears, right? Because we actually do have a group of sustaining engineering, although it's probably been reordered and called something else now in the last, God knows. But we do have dedicated development that works with support. I think the feedback that gets lost is how do we start to cycle what the sustaining group is doing to solve immediate problems and translate that into a direction and a strategy for the product itself.
Do you know that? So we have calls coming to support. They write if there's a problem, they write bugs. They call them charms. And so we look at those, we aggregate those. So that's like one form of feeding the next iteration of products, the next versions. We also have product. We go out, we do contextual inquiries. We have a whole backlog of usability issues that we want to work into future releases to get prioritized. So that I don't see as much of a problem getting the feedback in from support. If you get that, the problem in the politics that we have is how do you negotiate that with everything else that wants to go to a release. So, product managers want to put new feature functionality in, we want to fix usability problems, and everyone wants to make a product that sells and the users like. So, what's the right mix and all that? And that's what we try to do. And I guess if the other question was about how do you do the politics of actually starting this, when you say I haven't done usability testing before, I would go for small wins and not do a big study. I mean, and I really don't like videotaping tests because it takes hours to edit video. It's just really time consuming.
It's more to watch too.
Yeah, but where it is useful, the times it's useful, is when you tape a user having problems and bring it back and show that to senior executives. And that's an eye-opener for them to see people struggling and becoming angry with their product. And that's just something that's way different, watching somebody than reading it in a report. And so I would go for small wins and small tests. We don't need a big budget to try to let people see what good it can bring.
How do you find scale between large organizations and smaller organizations? I mean, a product the size of a Primavera doesn't really scale to a $100 million size company the size of mine with a 15-person IT shop. That's hunting deer with a howitzer. It's way more than I'm going to use at but I have to do portfolio management, but I can't spend for a tool, to use for something like that. But I still have to do those kind of things. But I mean, I've got to figure out how to do those kind of complicated things, but in a smaller way in my own little organization, just like usability. But it's probably an easier application for a concept like this because it's a concept. It's not a tool you buy. It's a thing you do. And so you just have to figure out how to do it. And so how do you scale that into a smaller organization?
This isn't that hard, and it doesn't have to be. And so if you want to buy a book it's like $15. It's Steve Krug. There's one called Don't Make Me Think, and his newest one is I think This Isn't Rocket Surgery or something like that. KRUG. Used to work at Apple. He's worked at a bunch of places. And I'm not a fast reader, but these are fast reads. They're small books. And it's if you have an interest in watching somebody and having empathy as they use your product, I mean, you will learn things and they will inform decisions that you make going forward about your product. And it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to have a huge lab.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's just, getting it started is small steps. I mean, even recognizing that you need to include your customer or your user in the process and start thinking about little ways you can do that, such as pulling down data and information you already have as to kind of how they use your site, things that your web metrics, or if you have anything like that, starting small and building that stuff in and trying to figure out what it means, right? So one of the best ways I think some of our interviewing or testing or things like that can do is flesh out the data or the kind of quantitative data you have and help you understand why things are happening. So you may know people are dropping off at a certain place, or maybe that's more website, but you may know these things about how people are using, but you may not know why, right? And that's where the usability really comes into play and can answer that. And you can start figuring that piece out and adding little pieces as you go, and even going small, even talking to 2 or 3 people. If you a couple great customers that are just always talking to you about whatever, just ask them, or hey, can I just watch you do that really fast? I mean, it takes a skill or a background to do certain aspects of this, that's for sure. Some of it really comes in the interpretation, knowing how to interpret what someone's issue means when they're having a problem, understanding what that means or what it's an indication of, but you can really start building that in. Another aspect of that is just that your customers will start to feel more involved in the process and more excited about where you're going and what you're doing. So that's one thing I like to point out about this is whether your customers are internal or external customers, right? When you think about, internalizing other employees of an organization for an internal product or external, one of the biggest things or most important things of integrating them in this process and bringing them in is that excitement that they build and their need. And you mentioned this already, but their want to be a part of this. It builds this kind of, everyone wants to find out what happens. And I just did something in an organization, and our stakeholder there started getting all these emails from everyone all over the place, not just the people that I talked to, but all these other people, because they just figured out. And they got excited about the project and what it meant, which only in the end improves your project and your outcomes too. So it's really good. It's another kind of positive of doing this, is making people feel a part of the process. A lot of times their frustration with a product stems from the fact they don't feel like they're a part of that process. And and that what they're saying is being heard.
And even in a small organization, because I worked in a couple of very small ones to start, and one of them recently, I don't know how many years this qualifies as recent anymore. It was a company called Global Knowledge, and they had a small product. It was a small product, but they had a lot of customers. It was only one product, really, and it was a content simulation and content management tool. So you could, it would read software, like you have it running on top of software, and you run it, and it just starts capturing every screenshot, and you can create these learning modules, and you can add content to it, so it's also a content repository. They had nothing at all. I was probably the second person in. So they recognized that they had a need for what usability and design could bring to the product and the improvements it could be. So I think if you've got a couple of people within the org, especially at your higher management level, to start kind of help promoting it, and then start working within the organization itself. You can even do little testing with people you work with, people who actually don't ever use the product, as a way to start to introduce it and get people into starting to see, you know what, there is something to thinking about how other people perceive the tool other than how we think and live it every day. So once you start to do that, and I think what I did in these smaller organizations is working with whatever you call them as product strategy or product owners, because they're the ones talking with the customers, is kind of getting involved early with the whole requirements gathering that they're doing and starting to have those conversations. Like, I'm really trying to design this, but I'm not understanding what the need is. Can I talk to you, and can you get me to talk to someone who you think would be comfortable with this? And then you just kind of gently move it through that way. And I think that's kind of one way to start to generate that kind of excitement and engagement that people will respond to.
Okay, we'll go to the next question.
You can keep it track.
The number 2?
I think so. We've used this term customer in a very broad sense, and I was asked at the beginning what we meant by that. And the second question actually asks the panel, what do you mean by the customer? Are we talking about the marketing group, the software liaison, or an external party that represents the major users of the product? Is we define the target customer and keep them integrated through the entire process? Do we see the customer changing through the process? And if so, how do we deal with that change? And the other question that I had, based on the conversation that just went forward, was how do you capture the information? I mean, you said that videotaping didn't exactly seem to be the best strategy. So I would be interested in knowing how you gather all this information, because it seems to me that note-taking might not be the best way to get all of this information so that you have it for the product upgrade. So, Scott, I'm going to move to number 2.
All right, so I'll try to remember all the parts of the question. So I think, the terminology we use, customer, Sherry was saying there's a separation in the software that I work on. So customer is the person who's buying it and has to be convinced to spend the money on it. User is the person who has to use it day in and day out. And that's, we're designing for both. And everybody internally, I don't consider a customer, I consider them colleagues. And we're all working together trying to make something good to sell. The other part of the question, about how we capture it. So as we do things, note-taking is the way we do it. We do testing, we'll do simple testing, like we'll do time on task, we'll note any errors. We do subjective satisfaction questionnaire. It's very simple. It's a Likert scale on 1 to 5, really straightforward and simple. And the majority of information insight we get from note-taking, and writing down where people have problems. And we do a lot of times it's hard to test our products outside of context. So it's important to see how many times a physician gets interrupted. It's important to see how where they are on the floor. We'll be out following them, taking notes, and that's how we we stick to assimilating things. We're not doing things like at the level designing, getting feedback, we're not doing things like doing eye tracking and getting heat maps and things. It's really more results oriented, and how long does it take people to do this, where they're having trouble, what patterns can we see that we think we can improve to help make the workflow more what they want it to be. Those are the things, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess it's my turn.
Yes.
Yeah, you think I talked enough. So the customer, like in my experience, I was just sitting here thinking about one time we went out to, this is when I worked at Primavera before. I say that a lot, the companies I've worked at. But we actually had an interesting visit out to Lawrence Livermore Labs in California for one of our products. And so it's really one of the funny things, like customers want to come out and talk to you, but really they want to sit around a conference table and talk at you. I don't like this, I don't like this. And so we were out there with a product strategy person, and we're all talking, and we're having the big conference room conversation for 2 days, right? We're in wine country, for God's sake. 2 days of sitting in a room, yammering at each other. But at one point I started asking, how do you guys work together? Like, tell me, like, I think somehow or another, I can't remember how the conversation came around to it, but I was talking about my role from a design and usability perspective. And I started asking them, okay, so you're using our software to do this. Can you tell me in what context or frame of reference you're doing it, right? And at one point, they had walked us back into the cubicles that they work in. And they got cubes stacked on top of each other, they're yelling at each other across the cubicles, and we come back in, and I'm like, that's the kind of stuff we need to know in order to better design our product so that if you get interrupted, you can come back, and the system hasn't timed out on you, it hasn't gone to a screen, we have a way of remembering where you left off or you got interrupted. And you're sitting there going, oh, my God, you guys have to come back, and you have to sit with us, and you have to see how we work together. And I'm like, yeah. And so that's kind of, it gets back to, I noticed some of the things that we're talking about, but it's I guess what I'm trying to drive at is how the customer, in some ways they were decision makers, but they were also users. And the minute that you can get them to step out of their role of, it costs me what to do this, versus, oh, you can pay attention and you will engage me in this, then I want you here. I don't know that the customer changes. To me, it's always that level together of decision makers and users, and weighing one against the other and balancing the two, and hoping you can get it in front of users, and taking yes, I'll talk to, customers who are decision makers because they're as close as some are going to be. And then the more I question, maybe they'll start to see that, yeah, I can start to press and ask for more contact with users. So I think that's kind of
Okay. For me, customers are really kind of, it's an interesting word to me. I don't hear it as often in this kind of context talking about, to me, what are users. I feel like it means many different things to many different people, and so I personally find it slightly confusing in the sense because I work for a consulting firm that works for other firms and helps them redesign. So there are clients or customers, and then within those people we have the decision makers that have brought us in to do the project, and then potentially we're designing something for their customers, right? So I use the term customer in the process when they call their customer a customer, right? But to me, when I'm doing the research, it's a stakeholder and it's a user. To me, a stakeholder is people who are the decision makers as it relates to a larger kind of process. What are the strategic goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What are the business goals for what it is we're doing? And help us make sure we're addressing the business needs. That gets a little hairy sometimes as it relates to the intranets because, or things of internal nature because those stakeholders may also be users of the product, but we make a distinction, and then the users are people who use it, whoever they are, right? Whoever they potentially are. I find that the customer, the user, does change to me, but I think it's to me as a researcher or someone who's learning about them, they don't change as a person, group, or whoever they are as it relates to being a user. I think what happens and I think it's in the kind of analysis process as we start to think about them. A lot of times we start out with who they are. So if they're an external customer, let's say if you're thinking they're identified by marketing in terms of their demographics and other key needs, right? And you kind of put out there for those things, you start to realize that people run together, right? As it relates to how they use a piece of technology. So their goals when they're using it may run together. They have what started as 3 groups becoming 1 group because they have the same goal, though it's a little bit larger. It's not on the task level; it's a little larger. They have the same goal when they're using the site, so they can kind of mentally be grouped as one, right? So you're not feeling like you're trying to reach all these different goals. So to me, they change in that way as it relates to my understanding of what they're trying to do when they use the site. And I always try to get it down to a smaller level, representative of 4 groups, but I may start with 12 or 15, but I find that they all have similar goals. Or they cross over, but those goals remain the same. What are the 5 main goals that people are trying to accomplish from using this? And that helps in the design process. As it relates to recording, how do we record it? I have used video recorders. I personally always use a small audio recorder. It's fantastic. It has a little USB port. It's portable. I can attach it onto a clipboard. Always tell people you're recording them. Always ask for permission. Always turn it off if they say no. It's very important. But I do that. I also use camera. So when we're doing contextual inquiry, sometimes a video camera is not appropriate because you're walking around and you really only have permission to see one person or one person's area, right? But just a regular camera, digital camera, and take a picture of what you see in that site really is helpful. We'll do those. I do audio record, and I ask permission. I generally try to do that. I don't always refer to it. My key form is note-taking. So some of it is just experience and time and knowing what you're trying to get at. So a lot of times I'm already thinking ahead to that means this requirement. They're telling me that I have this problem, right? And I identify it. And I usually, in my notes, earmark really great quotes or something someone said, put like exclamation points, and that's when I go back and I check out those sections. So part of what we're talking about is a quick process. We don't, as an anthropologist, I was trained, I had 2 years to do field work, and I had to write all these big crazy field notes, and I had to code them, I could do all these crazy things with it. I don't have that time. My time is very fast, and I had maybe 2 to 3 weeks to bring that information together, and I spend a good amount of it on the work. I do, but you know what you're looking for, and I can't go back and listen to every recording, right? So I look at my notes at the end of the day and rewrite them.
And I'd say I realized I forgot that part too. Very much note-taking. I think that the struggle is, and especially with people I work with, is training others within the organization to do what we do, and starting to have some kind of consistency in how you take notes and how you put it all back together. And to me, that's kind of something that I'm realizing right now as we're moving into some different design phases is I've got old information from old conversations, and I'm like, God, I've got pages and pages of handwritten notes. I didn't transcribe it, I didn't put it together. But the more that we're starting to do, the more that's something that we need to develop. And I think in terms of the customer, one of the things that we're doing that I've not quite done before is to start to think of users by their role. And so in this case, you walk a fine line. You don't want roles defined really granular, so like you've got 100 roles, that's not the point. But when you've got a software like ours that is primarily designed initially for scheduling and that kind of thing, and now you're having, and that was the domain of project managers, right? A very specific kind of skill set. And now you want people who are contributors to come in and enter time and do that kind of stuff. Very different role, very different expectations. So for us, we're starting to look at how do we think about our users by their role, understand how they interact differently, what their goals are, and how that affects how we might start, effectively, what is our strategy going forward with our products, and how we're designing to the different roles, and a way that makes sense to them and to the market and makes them happy, makes us lots of money.
How's the culture of organizations affect what you do?
It's extremely interesting, and that's actually one of kind of my favorite things about what I do. And I tend to go into many different organizations because of being a consulting firm. The variations I see are kind of, a lot of it stems from their history. So one of the most important things I try to do before I go in is learn what's been going on within the organization. So if there's been a